If everything had have gone to plan, Auckland City Rail Link would be up and running by now. But instead, the biggest city's biggest ever infrastructure project is way over the original budget and years behind the original schedule. And what does that say about how New Zealand does infrastructure? The City Rail Link CEO Sean Sweeney is on the way out, having taken up a job to run the construction of Dublin's new metro line. I started by asking him why the timeline and costs blew out.
I'd just like to say that since I commenced, we've changed the start date once and the budget's changed twice. Until you get into construction and into contract with your major builder, dates and budgets are estimates at best. So the budget got changed when I turned up because I advised the board on the first day that I didn't think the numbers were right based on prior experience, because I know there's an enormous amount of pressure on project teams to get a low number, to get a project up. And then we had COVID and we had to refund due to all the impacts of COVID, and that pushed the date out as well.
Why did we get it so wrong to start with? Why is it so hard to get those numbers right?
Well, there's a few things that contribute to that. There's a lot of pressure to get numbers down. There's a lot of academic papers written about the pressure on teams to price low. When you're competitively funding, you're bidding against other things inside government. You probably don't want to be the most expensive bid in the room. Also, these projects are just incredibly complex to price. And I've spoken to people in the industry, I've spoken to people in Australia, and they think projects of this size are actually almost impossible to price correctly, and that's a challenge for the industry.
When are people going to actually get on the City Rail Link, get to work, commute into the city or wherever they need to go?
Well, that's not really a question I can answer because that's going to be answered by AT and KiwiRail. They're talking about sometime in 2026.
Well, when are you going to hand it over then? When is it going to be completed
We're
for them?
aiming to be complete end of November 25, practical completion.
That's a long time since the Auckland Council first started talking about this. That's, 2010. Why has it taken so long to get there?
Well, I wasn't around at the time. It took till 2016 to get into construction, and people forget when construction started, the government wasn't co-funding. So the Auckland Council made a pretty brave decision to start the job, but they could only start some of it because they didn't have the money to complete the job. So they started in 2016. The government came on board, I think, in 2017. And since then, we've been moving at pace. But these things do take a while.
Time, budget, quality. There's a joke you can only have 2 out of 3 of those. If we're lucky, we'll get 1 in the form of quality.
Well, we're definitely focused on quality because quality is forever. It's been my experience, and I used to say to people in Australia that if you get the budget, if you're late, people will be annoyed until the day you open. If you get the budget wrong, it's usually one year's budget cycle, but if you get the quality wrong, it lasts forever. So we're certainly focusing on a quality product, but it's just really hard to get all those things estimated to a fine grain of accuracy. There's enormous uncertainties on these sorts of projects. When a construction firm prices one of these, if you can just imagine, they have to deconstruct the job into tens of thousands of elements. They have to make assumptions about productivity on every one of those elements. So they're assuming that people will work at a certain rate. People aren't machines. They have good days, bad days. We have good weather, we have bad weather. We've had floods, we've had COVID, we've had droughts. All those sort of uncertainties impact. We've had supply chain problems. So all of those things impact on the end time and cost. And I'd say not glibly, we only have limited ability to foresee the future.
Why do we not look at stringing projects together? Long talk of a second harbour crossing, the failed light rail project, whatever project we end up getting in terms of getting to the airport. Why do we not try and do these all at once?
Well, that's a big topic. It's my perception that we have lost the desire to do programs of major public infrastructure. It's my perception that, look, there was a lot of noise came on the back of the Think Big projects of the 70s and 80s. There's a lot of criticism about government. Government can't build these things. Government should get out of the way, leave it to the private sector. what happened after that was basically we stopped doing major public infrastructure for 30 years. I left New Zealand because there was nothing for me to do. I went to Australia. I came back here for this project, but that's one project. I would say the country, first of all, needs to decide what sort of infrastructure do we want to take this country forward, and I believe infrastructure is a fundamental underpinning of the health and wealth of a nation, but we need to have that big conversation as a country, not do sort of a series of one-offs, because at the moment we're doing a series of one-offs and they stop and they start, as we've seen recently. That's incredibly hard for the industry to approach them efficiently. We've actually lost what I'd call the tier one construction industry in New Zealand in the last 20 years. It doesn't exist anymore, and that's a problem for the country. We don't have the capacity internally to do major projects, and that's because the pipeline isn't there for firms to staff and plan and work towards.
How frustrating is that? You've just said yourself, you came back to New Zealand for one of our biggest projects, but you're leaving. It's not even going to be finished, and you're leaving for a much bigger project overseas. How frustrating is it to work here?
Well, bearing in mind that I came back just to work on this project, I'm not surprised that I'm leaving. The wider frustration, well, is it a frustration or is it a debate? I think we should have a debate as a country about what do we want to build. And if we have that debate in a big way, I think we'll have a big list, and that would enable people like me and a construction industry to stay and move forward. So, look, I've followed projects around the world, so it's not frustrating for me. I'd like to see New Zealand have a really hard conversation about what we want to do going forward, though.
You mentioned workers there, and I just was speaking to one of your workers who's off to Australia next week. He said, you know, the jobs are there, and I said to him, well, we need people like you here.
Absolutely.
And he said, yeah, we do. You know, how hard is it to get the workers to come in, to train people up, to get them to stay and not do what you've done and go off and find a bigger, better project? Well,
that's the challenge of these projects, because we're essentially a one-off. So you have to start from scratch. The Link Alliance had to build a workforce to do this sort of work from scratch. Everything is set up as a one-off, and then it's decommissioned. So at the moment when we do these projects, the country is paying an enormous premium because we're doing them as a series of one-offs. Going back to my earlier comment, if we had an ongoing heavy construction industry here capable of doing projects like or similar to this, and we used to, we built all the dams in the Southern Lakes, the Tongariro Hydro. We had that capability, but we've stopped doing it, and we're now paying a very high cost premium for anything we do.
How do we solve that then? We see, you know, different political parties come into government, they chop and change projects, it's so politicised. Do you have in your head an answer to stop that, to ensure these projects do go ahead?
Look, I've had conversations with politicians, or I've sat in rooms where politicians have talked about the issue of the pipeline. There's a view that they have a right to do that, they're elected on a mandate. I understand that view. What I don't think politicians or the public understand is how expensive that is making building in New Zealand. So yes, we have the right to do our program, but there are other countries, I gather like Ireland, that have a long-term infrastructure strategy that all the parties have signed up for, and it means the industry can plan. We don't have that at the moment. Nearly all my tunnelling guys have gone.
They've gone already?
Yeah. They have to. They want to work. Some have found jobs in roads and things, but the ones who want to work on tunnels, they've all gone.
So the next tunnel we have, we don't have those people.
From scratch.
We have to bring them back in from overseas.
And you have to bring them back on expatriate terms. They have to start up from scratch. You have to find them a house, relocate the kids. It's very expensive building projects like this, but we have no option until we have a longer term pipeline.
Do you have any hope that we can get that political consensus? Because there is in the industry, you know, we've had, you know, infrastructure pipeline groups set up, vertical construction groups, you know, there's the will there within the industry for this to happen. The politicians talk big about it, but then they come into government and they change their mind, right? Do you need something, say, an independent infrastructure commission that is funded, gets given the money by the taxpayers, and makes those decisions on projects. Take it out of the hands of politicians.
If we are to take the cost out of projects going forward in New Zealand, we have to do it differently to how we're doing it. And that will enable New Zealand to build more for the people of New Zealand. Now, that will require an approach that we don't have at the moment, and that will require a commitment and a discipline to building in a certain way and an agreed list of projects. It's all doable, but political parties would then give up absolute freedom to pursue their agenda. And that's going to be the rub, is what's the issue of greater good here?
How does it work overseas? You're going to Ireland. Have they been able to build that political consensus? They're a similar size to us. They're moving fast when it comes to infrastructure. What do they do to take it out of the hands of politicians?
Well, I gather that major infrastructure has been largely depoliticised. They've got an election coming up. I actually read the header page of the Irish Times most days. There's no debate on whether the Metrolink project I'm going to should happen or not. There's no particular party looking to score a point. They're just saying just get on and do it. I'm told they have a long-term strategy that all the parties have signed up to.
So it is possible. It is possible to get
for
politicians.
For a country the size of ours.
And public-private partnerships are talked about. This government obviously is looking at many different ways of trying to fund projects to try and get them to go ahead. Do you think PPPs are the answer?
They're not the answer. They are an answer. I've done a number of PPPs as a builder and as a client. They are just another form of delivery that have particular advantages and some disadvantages. They're costly. They cost more than a traditional delivery project because of the way that they're set up, but they are a very powerful way of getting certain things to happen, and if they're used on the right project, they can be absolutely the best way of doing it. So I think the country should be looking at them, but they're not the answer to every problem. But they will enable us to get projects going quicker.
What would you say to those concerned that the public sector take on the risk while the private sector get all the gains in those projects? And the same could be said when we look at other ways of other options for funding projects.
Well, my background in Australia, PPPs had a very good reputation for, you could say, firewalling the risk from the public purse. But in the last 5 years, that's no longer the case. All the major PPPs in Australia have come back to the government asking for more money. So actually now, they are no more cost certain than what I'd call a traditional delivery project.
While the station looks impressive, is going to look impressive once it's done, there has been a lot of disruption for those living and working in the CBD. Did you handle that right? What lessons have been learnt from that?
Well, again, when I started the job, there was $0 in the budget to handle disruption. Now, I think it's been a big issue, certainly for those people and those firms. And since then, the sponsors have come up with a hardship fund, and we've attempted to mitigate the impacts of it. But it is a big issue, and any project going forward would need to consider it. The general view was that people could use the Public Works Act if they felt so inclined. That's pretty hard for an average member of the public to do. So I think future projects are going to have to accept, particularly if they're in the CBD, there's going to be disruption, and there needs to be a sort of a realistic way of addressing that disruption.
So a fund needs to be set up, like eventually happened, to compensate those businesses?
That would be my view.
To buy them out, or you think that's...
I think there should be a fund. I think there should be an acceptance of the level of disruption. Not every impact on the businesses have we caused. Because we're the only ones paying, we tend to be the one blamed for everything. But the CBD in Auckland is changing massively. And it was my view that when Commercial Bay opened, it was going to draw the CBD down to the waterfront. And that's happening. That's just continuing to happen. So businesses around here have been impacted by CRL. They've been impacted by COVID, but they're also being impacted by the shift in the CBD as well, and different shopping patterns. We've now got people only coming into work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if you're running a cafe, it's just harder now. So there's a lot of things happening. But yeah, going back to your question, I think any major project like CRL would need to look realistically at disruption into the future.
Do you accept some responsibility, though, for that pain that's been caused? Do you apologise to those people?
We've apologised, but that doesn't really help their material problems. We've caused it.
And you accept that?
Yeah.
Looking over your time here then, as you head off, do you have a biggest regret, something you've learnt that you can learn from and perhaps others can as well?
No, the biggest thing I think we've already covered is I do think that, look, I'm an engineer, I'm a builder, and I believe that infrastructure is a good thing for the country. So I'd like New Zealand to have a really big conversation about what do we want to build in the next 30 years and what sort of country do we want to be, because infrastructure is a way of taking it there. And also, we're a long way away from the rest of the world, and we have to be really efficient, and infrastructure is a way of helping our productive industries be more efficient. I don't think there's one problem in New Zealand that New Zealanders can't solve.